Hey, Joel.
Yeah, I'm here.
Can you remember a funny story of whenever, as a kid, you like ran into something or didn't see where you were going?
Goodness. I've got tons of them. Honestly, as a kid, my parents threatened to make me wear a helmet around because I used to always run into stuff. In fact, I've got lots of scars to prove it. One time I was running around my dad's truck and I didn't realize the tailgate was down, and I just happened to be like right at forehead level with the tailgate, and so boom, busted me open. But one more memorable time, I was at my grandparents, Mimi and Papa Lowry. What do you call your grandparents? Were they Mimi and Papa or?
No, Mimi and Charlie.
And Charlie. Big first name basis there.
Yep. The first grandkid couldn't say grandpa or something, so he called him Choddy.
Choddy, okay.
Hi, we are Joel and Lauren Lowry, and this is our podcast, Wholehearted with the Lowrys. Our passion is to see people step into their destiny through discovering how good God really is and what it looks like to live in His love and purpose. We invite you to join us as we talk about life and leadership and how to live a wholehearted life.
Okay.
Yeah.
So anyways, I was at Mimi and Papa Lowry's house, and Mimi said, don't run in the house. And of course I had to anyways. And so I was running out of their house, and I hit that little latch on the old school screen door. Screen door pops open, one step down, and then there's a brick column. And, I think I was 4 years old, and 4-year-olds believe that if they close their eyes, then they disappear. And so I thought closing my eyes would mean that I'd disappear and wouldn't run into the brick column. Didn't happen. 4 stitches later, I found out that brick column, and I solidly collided. And so boom, there's a good scar on my head somewhere from that one.
So the lesson of the story is, if you're running into something, don't close your eyes.
Oh,
Put your hands out.
Put your hands out. Or stop.
Or stop. Or stop running.
What about you?
Yeah, I have a few. I am a dancer and move a lot with my arms, so I run into things a lot. Still.
Even when you talk.
Even now, I run into people. But I think, I have two. And these are when I was older in high school. I was a pretty irresponsible high school student.
Yeah. You still run into things, by the way.
I do still run into things, but I was at a friend's house and I was walking, walking up in front of a group of people. Like, you're very self-aware of.
You're paying attention to every step and
self-conscious whenever you're in high school. So I was like trying to look cool, but I didn't. My microphone just dropped. I didn't. Mic drop. That's all I have to say. So I didn't see a sliding glass door that was closed, and so I just smacked right into it, and everyone laughed, and I felt like the biggest idiot, And then another time, my friend and we were at a basketball game, and we were outside skipping with our arm together, linked together, and I think she probably saw it and thought, this is gonna be really funny to watch Lauren slam into this now, hindsight. So I'm skipping with her, laughing, and there is a pole right there, and I just slammed my head right into the pole, and I got a golf ball sized bump on the side of my head, and just thinking it was actually probably really dangerous. But
I never heard that story.
Really? Yeah, it was. And then there were people standing around, and I just felt like both of those instances felt, I think, what we talked about in our last episode, just that self-condemnation. I
want to run and hide.
You idiot. You can't even see things in front of you. So, so there's our head injury stories. So if we say things that are a little off, that's why.
Many head injuries.
We've run into a lot of things with our heads.
Yeah.
So how does that relate to what we're going to talk about today?
I'm not totally sure.
Yeah. So I think what we want to talk about today is, I a few years ago read a book called The Compound Effect by Darren Hardy, and there's a quote that he says in there that has forever changed my life. And he said, you become a mature adult the day that you take 100% responsibility for the things you do, the things you don't do, and how you respond to the things that are done to you. And that really shifted my thinking, because I often viewed myself as a victim of circumstance and like the world was happening to me.
Yeah.
And that quote really empowered me to take responsibility for my life and to really think, okay, what are the things I can take responsibility for? And then what are the things that I am being lazy in or not taking responsibility for that I need to take responsibility for? Like, I have to then take responsibility for things I don't do. So if I should exercise and I don't, and I gain weight, I had to take responsibility for the fact that I'm not being active.
Yeah.
It's
not something that just happens to you.
Right. Like, I am not a victim of weight gain. Like, that's my problem. I'm not a victim of poverty. Like, if I don't have money in my checking account, that's because I have not taken responsibility for my life to earn the money that I need in order to live, you know? And so, and how I respond to what's done to me. And so I have thought, well, you did that to me. You raised me this way. You led me this way. You were this husband this way. This child is acting this way. So therefore I am acting this way. And it's your fault that I'm this way.
Yeah.
And if you think about that quote, like, no, I'm actually going to take responsibility for how I'm going to respond to what's done to me. And so then I'm empowered to live my life in a way that I actually am not a victim of anything.
I love what happens when you break down the word responsibility. It's your ability to respond, right? And it's like, I actually take responsibility. So now I'm putting myself in the driver's seat in how I respond to what's been done to me or
it's a response for your ability.
Yeah.
You know? So I think today what we want to talk about is responsibility and taking responsibility for our lives.
Yeah.
And how our lives, how we're going to take responsibility for how our lives affect our own self and how our lives affect other people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Keep going.
So,
I just learned that's what we were talking about. So you keep going.
Well, I think, we are in this role of pastors and we lead a team of people, and we spend a lot of time in relationship and working on relationships and counseling people who have been through relational breakdown. And so I think we've just really been in this place of like talking about like, how do we take responsibility for our lives and how do we help people take responsibility for our lives? And a lot of that is owning and apologizing for the way that our lives have hurt other people.
Yep.
And how we respond whenever people don't apologize or whenever they don't apologize the right way or cause more harm in how they apologize and how they don't take responsibility for their lives. So I think like in our personal conversations, we've just been talking about like, okay, how do we do this healthily?
Yeah.
How do we help people do this healthily? How do we teach our kids how to do it healthily? How can we counsel people who are in relational fallout and breakdown to do this healthily?
Yep. And I think even, our last 3 episodes were on selfishness, self-reliance, and self-condemnation. And those things play a major role in how we apologize to people. Mm-hmm. So selfishness is, it can't be my fault. It must be yours, and I had nothing to do with it. It's all on you. I think self-reliance is, I'll just figure it out myself. I don't really need you. And then self-condemnation is, it's probably my fault.
Right. Yeah. So, and so a lot of that, what is necessary to respond healthily whenever we've hurt someone is vulnerability, or when someone's hurt us is vulnerability. Like, you can't have healthy connection without being vulnerable.
It's impossible, which means that when there's a breakdown, it's always a two-way street, right? I'm responsible for what I do and for what I don't do and how I respond to whatever happens to me. So I have an ability to respond on all of those fronts. Let's say you're 100% in the wrong, you've hurt me, you've damaged me. I still have the right and the ability to respond to that. Which means that I have assertive communication. Hey, what you did really hurt me, and it's caused this breakdown. The reason why I'm bringing it up is because there's meaning and value in our relationship. Yeah, the guy that gives me the finger when I'm driving down the road because I cut him off or whatever, I'm not looking to reconnect and reconcile with that guy because I don't care about that relationship. It's not one, right? But meaningful relationships, I'm willing to engage, and also engage in curiosity. So it's like I may perceive that it's 100% you and 0% me, but I'm also open to the fact that it may be partially me and not fully you. And so I'm going to come to you actually not in self-defense, but in humility in order to seek reconciliation, which it may be, hey, I got really hurt. I feel like there's breakdown in our relationship, and I'd like to talk about it because I really value our relationship.
Yeah.
I was talking with a friend yesterday who's a counselor, and just the idea that really humility is the key to making relationships work. Like, you need love, that's obviously central, but humility, it kind of greases the wheels of connection.
Yeah. And this is one thing that I feel like, Joel, you have done so well with me in our relationship that I don't know, like, you've told me that as you counsel young men that are married, you say, like, you should always be the first one to find, like, a way to apologize.
Absolutely.
Like, you be the first one to, in the conflict, to look at the conflict and say, okay, where can I take responsibility for how I've caused this disconnect in our relationship? And you be the first one to say, I can see how my silence, my aggressiveness, my anger, my selfishness, whatever, has caused this
my
disruption.
Right?
My lack of self-awareness, my whatever, has caused this disconnect in our relationship. And I see that, and I own it, and I take responsibility for it.
Yeah, I think when it comes to marriage, when Paul writes to the church at Ephesus, and it's that part where he says, one, most people leave out 5:21, which is submit to each other. So there's actually a key to making marriage work is mutual submission. And then it says, wives, submit to your husbands. And then it says, husbands, love your wives like Christ loved the church, that you would lay down your life for her. So the prerequisite, I think, to being a husband in marriage, but essentially just in any place of leadership, is to be the one that dies first. You lay down your rights, your life first, which means when there's conflict, it's like, oh, I'm going to lay down my self-defense games, my self-righteousness, that I'm right on everything, and I'm going to look for a way to build a bridge of trust that can endure the weight of truth. So now we can have a real conversation about the breakdown, because I don't win by being right, I win by being reconnected.
Right.
And you win, and our relationship wins by being reconnected. And so where there's love, what humility does is it says, I'm laying down my rights to self and to being right, really laying down my pride in order to reconnect. And I think that's central. And so I've just made or created the value that I'm going first. Like, I'm going to, whenever there's disconnection, whether it's 100% my fault or 100% Lauren's, do whatever it takes in order to reconnect, which maybe it's none of it is my fault, but I'm still going to say, hey, I value this relationship. There's breakdown. What's going on? But usually I've got a percentage share in the deal, usually often higher than 50%. And so I'm going to do whatever I can to say, you know what did I do wrong, and how can I make it right?
Right. Yeah. And you have said before, the definition, or one definition of vulnerability, is to make yourself open to attack.
Yep.
And so in that place of that vulnerable communication, of being the one that I'm going to go first, and I'm going to be vulnerable in this place to say, I value this relationship. I want to talk it out. I'm willing to take responsibility for what I need to take responsibility for. Then opens you up to attack, where I could say, you're right, you are a loser, and and you did this, and I could totally blow up on you and totally blame you for everything, but that you in your leadership are willing to go first. And I think a lot of men think, oh, I'm laying down my life for my family, I'm going to work every day, and I'm providing food and shelter, but yet don't provide the vulnerable connection for their family that actually leaves their family starving.
Yep. Starving and emotionally, relationally, spiritually. And so I think that's the key. And most people would think, oh, well, going first and admitting you're wrong is a cowardly way to live. But I would challenge that with the exact opposite and say it actually takes incredible courage to say, you know what, I was wrong, or I value this relationship, or I'll do whatever I need to do to make it right. I think there's incredible courage in that. And me having the value system of going first doesn't exempt Lauren from going first. It's just I'm in a race to say, hey, I value our relationship way more than I value being right. And so I'm willing to go first, and I'm not going to tolerate disconnection. And as a result, we hardly ever have a disagreement that lasts for more than 15 or 20 minutes, because we're just reconciling quickly, because we're on a race to reconciliation, because we value connection. And it doesn't mean we're not racing just to say I'm sorry, because the truth is I'm sorry often doesn't do a whole lot. It's way deeper than that. I think most people miss they think that an apology is just legal, but it's also emotional. And another way to say it is, it's not just head, like that I recognize what I did was wrong, but it's also heart, that I recognize what I did impacted you and had an emotional cost that you had to pay. And so I'm going to address that. So we know that in Scripture we're required to forgive. It's part of being a forgiven people and living forgiven is that I forgive. But I think we miss the role of a meaningful apology. And what an apology actually does is it takes ownership of what I did or didn't do, or how I reacted, how I responded. It takes ownership of that, and how, not just what I did, but how what I did impacted you. So it actually, a meaningful apology is a conduit for comfort. It allows comfort to flow. And we know this, that comfort is the key ingredient for healing of pain and trauma. So 2 Corinthians 1 says that we receive comfort from God so that we can comfort others. Jesus says in the Sermon on the Mount, blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. And there's something about comfort that actually brings healing and reconciliation. And so when I apologize, it's not simply about saying I did something wrong, but it's also about providing comfort that brings relational restoration, but also a meaningful apology brings emotional restoration to that individual. So it's not just legal, it's also emotional, which means that I recognize, hey, what I did was wrong, and I probably hurt you in this way. And it doesn't matter if it's intentional or not. My intention is secondary. The effect that it had on you is what matters in the context of our relationship.
Yeah, I think whenever we first started just practicing this in our own lives, as a kid, you're told, you need to apologize to that person for I think about this with our 3-year-old, trying to teach him empathy, really. Like, I need you to apologize, but above that, I need you to see how your actions affected this person, how your hitting your sister had an effect on her heart in this way and made her feel this way. You actually, or Joel's been saying, your strength is meant to protect your sisters, not to hurt your sisters. So to help him recognize, oh, wow, like, I don't need to just apologize that they're crying. Like, I'm sorry that you're crying. I think oftentimes we can get apologized to that way. Like, I'm so sorry that you're feeling the way that you're feeling, or I'm so sorry that you are responding this way, which is actually not an apology.
I have no right to apologize for your emotions.
Right.
I can't, that's illegal to apologize for your emotions. I can apologize for how what I did, intentional or unintentional, how that affected your emotions, but I can't apologize for the response that it creates in you.
Right. Because that kind of apology actually is not taking responsibility for how my actions affected you. I'm actually just
saying, I hate to see you crying. It makes me uncomfortable that you're disappointed.
Right. Yeah. And so to help our 3-year-old recognize, like, you're not just saying sorry, but you're actually having to recognize how your lack of self-control is actually hurting your sister's heart, and actually communicating to her that you're not safe, that you're actually her enemy, and you're not on her side, and that you're not her advocate. And I it's 3 years old and 5 years old where it's like they don't get that, but down the road, whenever they're adults and they are having to work through our will or whatever, if they don't learn that actually how my actions affect you in this way, and that we are actually not on the same team, it's going to be really messy once we're gone. And so it's important that we teach our kids how to own their actions and take responsibility for it so that they can relate rightly.
Yeah.
And I think about them as married people and as parents, and if they cannot own how they've hurt their spouse or their kids, then they are going to have jacked up relationships.
They're not going to be able to go very far.
They're not. Their kids are going to be emotionally messed up. Their marriage is going to be rocky. Like, it's just not going to be good.
Yep.
And so I think as we started working through this stuff, for me, it was for me to start to say, I'm sorry. But then that deep, like, stripping of self of, oh wow, I can actually see how my bratty attitude affected you, or I can actually really see how my selfish taking affected you, like brought this whole new perspective to how my relationship affects, how I act affects you, that I'm actually not an island. And then I think the deeper revelation for me was to start to see God that way, that God, I'm sorry I sinned. I'm sorry I cussed. I'm sorry I did that bad thing. I'm sorry. From that, like, to, oh my gosh, God, I can see whenever my heart was cold towards you or that person, how that had an effect on your heart.
Yep.
How that had an effect on the connection of our relationship. It's not just this legal transactional law thing, but it actually is relational, that our relationship with God and our actions in our life actually have an effect on his heart.
They grieve him, like our sin grieves him, right? So it's like as an effect, and it's not just, I mean, the truth is that when I hurt Lauren, it grieves God. And so there's the legal side, which is, hey, I recognize what I did was wrong, and that's the starting place, right? I recognize the impact that it had on you, but I also recognize the spiritual implications of what I did, that it had an effect on God, that even, you know, essentially sin is an invitation to the demonic to participate in our lives, and so it begins to have even an influence with everybody that you have responsibility over, right? It's that invitation. And so realize, oh, there's actually, like, I'm not on an island, there's spiritual implications to it. And the reality is that I then begin to realize, oh wow, like, I'm a really powerful person, and I have a whole lot of responsibility. And it's key that I learn how to wield that responsibility with strength and sensitivity. Right.
Yeah. And I was just thinking about, what was I thinking about? I had this thought. It was really good. That whenever we then, sorry, my brain has been like on all morning. So I'm like, woo, need some coffee. Whenever we relate to God that way, you know, like you had said earlier, whenever we are vulnerable and humble, you know, God gives grace to the humble. Whenever we are humble and say to God, I am so sorry for how I acted, I can see how that had an effect on your heart. You said, you know, that vulnerability then becomes that conduit for comfort. And then comfort comes in, then grace comes in. And so it's like he gives grace to the humble. The comforter comes in that moment. The Holy Spirit comes in and brings the grace necessary for the reconciliation of that relationship. And that's the beauty of being in relationship in this covenant with God of forgiveness and reconciliation, because that's how we then can relate to God. And then that becomes the overflow of that relationship then spills over into our lives. And so if we aren't relating to God that way, then we are not going to relate to other people that way. If we cannot, so good, I have like goosebumps right now. Like if we can then begin to recognize, instead of running whenever we mess up, running in shame and self-condemnation from God and hiding, we can say, God, I see how my unbelief that you are not a good God, how that has an effect on your heart. And I take responsibility for that. I see that is a wrong belief in me. The Comforter comes in, the Holy Spirit comes in, and he brings us comfort, and he's like, okay, I can work now. I can be reconciling in this relationship, and then I can empower you to live and be all that I've created you to do, all that I've created you to be.
It's interesting. All addiction, I think I would say at least nearly all, probably all addiction, is the pursuit of comfort in the places that we've been traumatized and have not healed. And so it's actually a pursuit of false comfort in order to protect what we didn't receive in the middle of our pain. And so a meaningful apology actually is a conduit for grace to flow, so the comforter, the real one, is present. But when we miss that, what happens is those lies come in to take care of self, and that it's all on me. And so I begin to pursue false comforts in order to numb the pain and the trauma that I'm experiencing. And it just creates an even worse situation that begins to pattern.
Right.
Really bad.
And so you see people living their lives in addiction, whatever that addiction is, not taking responsibility for their lives. And you can probably trace it back to
It's usually generational.
trauma that has not been comforted.
Oh, absolutely.
And so we can actually counteract that in people's lives and change generational patterns by simply apologizing and allowing comfort to come into people's lives.
You know, one of the most powerful things that we've experienced in doing counseling with people is that we'll oftentimes stand in the place maybe of a parent and vicariously apologize. And the first time I experienced that, somebody else was doing it with me, and I was like, oh, this is going to be cheesy. And then something shifted, and it was like the Holy Spirit, the Comforter, just came in and just anointed that person. And it was like, oh my goodness, my life has never been the same, because Joyce got up. She was about to have knee surgery. She had major knee damage, was in her 60s, and she got up on the chair and was shouting and yelling for me, like celebrating me. And there was something for this lady that I'd known for maybe 2 or 3 days, and she's vicariously apologizing, and it just brought so much healing. And so maybe you're in a place where the people that wounded you, they're not safe enough to bring back into your life, or they won't respond to, hey, you hurt me, or maybe they've passed away. But even a vicarious apology actually releases the anointing of the Holy Spirit to bring comfort. It's really, really meaningful.
Yeah. And we also can be that person. If we have someone in our lives where we know that they need an apology from their sister that wounded them and abandoned them and hurt them, and that sister is not there, I can be that sister. I can stand in that place and say, so-and-so, I see how my actions towards you wounded you and made you feel whatever. Will you forgive me? And to stand in that place of reconciliation and say, I see how that hurt you, and I do not want to relate to you that way anymore through this pain. The healing that can come for that person whenever we're willing to stand in that place and be that apology.
I have kind of a rabbit trail thought, and that is, for those of you that are looking to get married, maybe you're dating, maybe you're engaged, maybe you just want to be married, do not get married to somebody that cannot apologize. If they can't apologize, if they can't own their stuff, then just you're setting yourself up for misery. And if you're that person, then just begin to practice, just begin to put it into action. And then another thing I would say is, if your boss trying to hire somebody, don't hire somebody that won't. I would make a hiring question. Hey, give me an example of a time that you made a mess and you cleaned it up.
Right.
And I think somebody's humility and ability to reconcile is way more important than their perfection. Vulnerability, I think, trumps perfection every day, because things will go wrong, things will get out of whack, and your ability to reconnect and to choose humility will bring so much healing. And the truth is that relationships can only go so far without conflict. The way that we really grow in our relationships is through conflict. We actually need those testing grounds for our relationship and for our connection. And so what a meaningful apology, doesn't have to be perfect, but what a meaningful, sincere apology does is it actually strengthens a relationship. And so when things go sideways in a relationship, I sort of, it hurts, but I also get excited because I'm like, oh, we're going to go deeper.
Yeah. If both people are willing to play ball, then you can go deeper.
Yep. And if both sides aren't willing, if you're the only one willing to play ball, then you've just determined the boundaries of the relationship. It's like, oh, we've gone as deep as we can, and I still have hope for the future. But until this pattern changes, we're probably not going to go a whole lot deeper.
Yeah. Yeah. So thinking about the reasons why we don't apologize,
Mm-hmm.
like why would, like, I think about times in my life, like why I wouldn't apologize. And really, I was just protecting my pride.
Mm-hmm.
But then underneath the pride is fear.
Yep.
I'm afraid of something. So I put up the shield of pride to protect where I feel at risk, where I feel vulnerable, where I feel like I could come under attack. But then underneath that fear is unbelief. I don't believe I am who God says I am. I don't believe God is who he says he is. Whatever. There's a lie in there that is a stronghold in my life that then has these layers. So it's I have unbelief. The outside layer of that is fear. The outside layer of that is pride. The outside layer is I'm not going to apologize.
Yep.
You know, I'm not going to take responsibility for this. And so it's interesting if we look at those things in our lives where it's like, why can't I tell my husband I'm sorry?
Yeah.
Like, why can't I tell my kids I'm sorry? You go back and you drill it back. And that's a good practice to practice with in your prayer journal with God and say, okay, I have this breakdown in relationship with my child, with my boss, with my coworker, with my spouse. And why can't there be reconciliation? Okay, God, where do I need to take responsibility? Why can't I take responsibility there? Where is that pride? What am I afraid of? What am I ultimately not believing you for?
Yep.
And I encourage you, if you're in that place, to go there with God and to let him reveal those things. Because as soon as we realize, oh, that's just a lie, that's actually not who I am. I actually was created to partner with the Comforter, to be an agent of reconciliation. That's actually true. And this lie is hindering me from stepping into who I was created to be.
Yep.
Then something opens up and we can actually reconcile.
Yep.
In that relationship.
Yep. And then it just becomes fun.
Yeah. Yeah. So going back to running into things and knocking our heads around, we were talking about this thing called apraxia, and you probably know more about it, but apraxia is the inability to control your body movements because of a trauma or injury to your head,
brain, yeah.
to your brain. So then there's not a connection in your brain to your body to tell your body how to move. And so we were talking about this concept with relationships and emotions, and how we can have relational apraxia, like where we have traumatic events that happen to us relationally, that then causes a dysregulation in our body. And we are by no means, let me disclaimer, not doctors, not psychologists, not psychiatrists, not counselors. This is just, we just read a lot and study a lot and try to make a lot of connections and watch a lot of YouTube videos. So this is where we're coming from, meeting with counselors and talking with counselors, but we are not.
That's not us. Yeah.
That's not us. But we were talking about this concept of relational apraxia and how we're traumatized relationally. And so then emotionally and relationally, we do things that cause the arm of our relationship to smack someone in the face, and we hit them in the face, but we have like this apraxia where it's like, I didn't intend to do that to you, but you did, because you don't have control over that, but it's related to a trauma. Why we can't control certain relational aspects. So maybe we are in relationships and we are just selfish over and over again, or we
don't even see it,
and we
right?
don't,
because there's a disconnect between how people experience us and our intentions, and we have to recognize, my intentions are great, but how people experience me is reality to them, right? And so I have to say, okay, if lots of people are experiencing me, if I'm doing damage in relationships unintentionally, it still comes back to me. I'm the common denominator, and I need to figure out, why am I dysregulated? Why am I not able to have the intentionality that I want, to have the outcomes that I want? Well, maybe because there's a disconnect, probably because of pain and trauma, that would keep me from being received and perceived the ways that I would like to be. Yeah.
So I think a lot of this comes from just our own personal journey and just where we've been journeying with God lately. And our desire really is to see people reconciled and in healthy relationship.
Absolutely.
And so I hope today that you have gleaned from our experiences, our stories, and that it really will help you as you move forward in your relationships. So thank you so much for being here, and we can't wait to be with you again.
Hey, thank you again for joining us for another episode of Wholehearted with the Lowrys. We would love to hear from you, and we would be honored if you would share our content with others. We're so excited to be on the journey of wholehearted living together.